Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the 31 Days of Archaeological Horror. Today I want to talk about sacrifice. Human sacrifice, to be exact, and possibly children's sacrifices. Probably. It's good that I'm not monetized because probably this one wouldn't survive that. But let us talk about human sacrifice. As many of you may be aware, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of historical accounts of human sacrifice throughout history. And, of course, the archaeological record backs up every single one of these claims without fail. Or does it? It's the topic of human sacrifice is, in my personal opinion, completely overblown. And my reason for saying that kind of a thing is that there's not a lot of archaeological evidence to really support human sacrifice. Even the situations where we find people who may have been a sacrifice of sorts, it's really hard to tell. Was the person actually sacrificed, or is the person buried? Is it a form of burial? A lot of people like to look at the bog mummies, and they like to look at, there's this really great preserved frozen child, which is just, it's a stunning preservation. I mean, nature is amazing in what it can do. The thing is, though, are we actually looking at sacrifices here? And how do you prove that these people were sacrificed by their cultural group for whatever purpose? Sometimes with the bog mummies, you'll find the Celtic and Gaelic bog mummies, I think they're the same thing, don't come for me. You'll find that they'll have nooses around their necks. I think there's a couple of them. That one, I mean, that's a weird thing. But are we sure it's sacrifice and not just straight up murder? I mean, people have been murdering each other for a long time. What better place to dump a body than straight into a bog? So that's the problem, though. We don't know. Even when we find things that we think might be sacrifices or evidence of human sacrifice, we don't know. And it's, as I said, it's hard to prove, especially when we're looking at the archaeological record. It's hard to take things that far back. Now, osteologists are able to look at bones, which is usually all we have left over, and determine if there is trauma of some sort on the bones. And there are certain forms of trauma on the bones that do relate to certain kind of actions. But there's always a but. Just because some sort of violence was performed upon a person and it shows in the bones doesn't necessarily mean that was the cause of death, or even that it was inflicted with the intention of being sacrificial. So, the reason why I really wanted to go over this is because I think last year a book came out called Evil Archaeology, and I really took it to task, and I'm still going to take it to task because, frankly, it's a crap book. But one of the things that the author really relies on in that book is the sensationalization of pagan human sacrifices as recorded in history throughout time. So here's the problem with using historical documents, especially old historical documents, as historical fact. We do know archaeologically that sometimes those things don't hold up. And a lot of times they don't hold up when one group is being slandered by another. Go figure. Who knew? Who knew? Like, the whole adage, history is written by the victor, is true. The people that write the history are usually the people who won whatever that particular moment in history was. And another thing that was done is slander. So we still do this today. So I don't even try to pretend like we're like above this, because darling, no, we are so not. But the whole idea of to make your enemy less human than yourself. And one of the ways to make someone less human was to have them embody traits that were abhorrent to your particular culture group. Most groups that I can think of don't particularly like murder and sacrifice. Those are usually two things that are pretty no-no in the world. So, that being said, what's one of the best ways to slander a group of people then that accuse them of doing the things that you find ethically and morally reprehensible, like child sacrifice and child murder? So, if you will notice my lovely background here, this is a supposed altar of Moloch. I do say supposed. The problem with the concept of Moloch and the tying of Moloch to the concept of Baal, and then accusing both of them of being child sacrifices, is that none of this makes any sense. It doesn't line up, y'all. Moloch has a very interesting and in-depth history as a figure within culture to begin with. So if you're interested in that, this is probably not the video for you. I'm not going to go into the history of Moloch and why that particular deity is, for whatever reason, connected with Baal. It's all about the child sacrifice. But there is one thing in particular that is important to understand. One of the reasons why people believe that there's some form of child sacrifice connected with Baal and Moloch is because there is a written account by, I believe they're Jewish priests, who witnessed a child sacrifice. Now, what they say in this writing is that these children were passed through fire. This can mean a lot of different things, and it has been suggested with some support that the concept of passing through fire didn't necessarily mean burning them into ash, but what it actually meant was the act of walking between fires, or possibly even fire jumping, as a form of cleansing. Now, this we know is a fairly widespread practice, pre-Christian practice of cleansing, was to create a sacred fire out of certain herbs and woods and stuff, and then to use the smoke or the flame to purify or cleanse an area or a set of people, by walking past or between two fires. So as you create a bonfire here, a bonfire here, can you see this? And then you walk between the two of them and you are cleansed by the fire. I'm sure there was more to it than that, but we may never know. This is a concept of passing through fire. And so it is suggested that this passing through fire that was being observed was actually an initiation of the children for some purpose. Possibly a coming of age ceremony, an acceptance into a group ceremony, could have been anything. But chances are, and see, this is where Occam's razor comes in for me, because it makes more sense and requires less evidence to prove that there was no sacrifice occurring, and that it is simply a ceremony of some variety where there was fire involved and the children, or individuals in general, passed through the fire, walked next to it, walked between two fires. Fire jumped. People fire jump. It's not my recommendation. I have unfortunately watched a very bad fire jump go very, very wrong, and Let me tell you, that's a long night of explaining to the police why you're all dressed up in medieval garb and you've got two idiots who are half charred boiled because they decided to jump into the bonfire after being told not to. That was a long night. That was a long, long night. That being said, it takes less evidence to support that idea than it does the evidence to support child sacrifice. I'm not saying that there aren't anything in history that might be a giant finger pointing towards individuals being sacrificed for some purpose or another. Clearly there are. But is it as rampant as we are led to believe? A lot of times when you find these accounts of truly horrific forms of sacrifice, of human sacrifice, not just child sacrifice, but human sacrifice in general, they're usually being used to explain how a group of people are so completely different from the group of people that are describing them. My mind keeps going back to, again, the Evil Archaeology book, and one of the accounts that the author chose to use in their book, talking about this incredible human sacrifice of a young woman in the book. If you want to go read it, go read it. I am not recommending the book, but the description that the author chooses to use is so incredibly insane. Like, it's something out of a horror movie. It's that freaking nuts. And in my memory, I cannot for the life of me ever remember any form of evidence that would back up this particular sacrifice ceremony that the author, of course, claims is happening. Now, this sacrifice is being placed on Native Americans, and it's being accounted by white explorers. And of course, when the author recounts it, I don't even think they attribute a tribe to these Native Americans who are performing this sacrifice. And that right there tells us a lot, because it means that this account is being possibly made up from whole cloth. Because again, I've never read an account like this before, ever, with early settler and early explorer interactions with Native Americans. I've never read anything like this before. And so I'm just kind of when you encounter something like that and you are an archaeologist, especially somebody who does North American archaeology, and you read something like that and you're just are you making this up completely? Because I feel like you're making this up completely. And the whole point of it is, in my opinion, the whole point of making this stuff up, and we know historically the point of making it up is to vilify and other a group of people. I need to prove that my group of people are the best people, and so all of my peoples and my culture's moral and ethics have to be superior. And now I've encountered this group of people, and I don't like them for whatever reason. I want something from them that they're not giving me, or I'm just afraid of them because they're different. So now I'm going to project upon them the opposites of my culture group. And so now they are no longer human because they've been removed from the in-group in such a way that they do inhuman things. So, for example, my group doesn't perform human sacrifice because reasons. So their group must. And I'm going to recount a story of them doing this thing. The problem is this gets written down in historical documents and such and gets carried forward. And maybe at the time when it's written down, it's written in language that would have at the time made sense to a reader as not actually portraying human sacrifice. The problem is that later on down the road, words change, language changes, imagery changes, our ability to interpret old documents changes, and what may have at first just been these children are walking between two bonfires as part of a pagan ceremony turns into they're burning children to the god Moloch because child sacrifice. It's a trap. It's a trap. And you need to be aware of it when you're interacting with these kinds of claims against any group, modern or ancient, because anytime you hear anyone say that a group of people practice human sacrifice, you should immediately say, bullshit, prove it. And when their only proof is historical accounts from ancient documents, then you should probably, in my opinion, not accept that as a fact. I'm not saying that you can't use historical documents as evidence for things, but it needs to be backed up by physical evidence. So again, archaeology. I'm trying to think of modern examples. Oh, because I spend so much time talking about like the Norse and Vikings, this whole concept of the blood eagle. This particularly gory form of sacrifice where an individual is sometimes not even strangled, but sometimes they are strangled and then their rib cage is divided and split open, and so it looks like bloody eagle wings or something. I don't know. First off, the accounts, there's too many different variations for it to be static. So there's too many different ways that this thing happens. And putting on my pseudo-archaeology hat, too many different origin stories usually means somebody made something up and we're now just playing a game of telephone. Also keep in mind, it's a really difficult thing to do, especially if somebody's not dead when you're doing it. Nobody's going to just passively sit there and allow you to rip their rib cage open and expose their beating heart to the elements. It's just not something that's probably going to happen. And third, I honestly, and I may be wrong, but I don't think I am, I honestly cannot for the life of me think of any physical evidence we have of this ever occurring. Like, that would leave marks on a bone. That would leave some serious bone trauma. And I cannot, for the life of me, think of anything that would line up with that. There are some freaky things that osteologists find in archaeological digs. There are some really weird, unexplainable things. But I can't, for the life of me, ever recall there being any evidence to support this concept of the bloody eagle, which means this is something that got made up. I don't know when or where or by who, but probably it was, I mean, if it follows the pattern, probably it was made up by local people at the time to create a fear of Norsemen, possibly Viking raiders, possibly, but again, my Viking Raiders radar. So they make up this story to make the Viking/Norse people look bad, thereby justifying their feelings towards them and justifying any action thereby taken towards them. As I said, we see this kind of thing today. Watch politics. Just watch politics. You know, my opponent's a communist. What's the worst thing you could call someone? A leftist commie pinko. Do people even know what that means anymore? Like, is there anybody alive who still remembers that stuff? I don't know. What's the worst thing you can get called in politics these days? Anyway, my point is, it's the same kind of concept. My opponent is X because I think you will be shocked that my opponent is X. Well, my opponent is Y because in my in-group, that's the most shocking thing this person can be is Y. And thus it goes, backwards and forwards. The only thing saving us today, I guess, is the fact that we can fact check stuff a lot faster and a lot quicker, but, 100,000 years from now or something crazy like that, if all we've got is some lamely written article in the one surviving newspaper that said such and such candidate was X, what are they going to believe? And then there's things like, how do you even prove that? How do you prove X? He's a cannibal! The man was a cannibal! How do you know? What evidence does cannibalism leave on a body? Now, maybe if you found his little cannibalistic hidey hole where he was like, his little cannibalistic butcher shop where he was like cannibalizing and butchering the people that he was going to cannibalize, and then you could be like, wow, there's a lot of left clavicles here and not a lot of right clavicles. Or like, I don't know where I'm going with this, but my point is that would be some evidence, I guess. Then you could be like, yeah, this is so-and-so's butchery. He was eating people, or at least was butchering people in a form of way that you would eat people. But that's the thing. Without hard evidence, it's hard to back these things up. All you're looking at is historical slander towards groups of people in order to make another group of people look good, or to justify an action that another group of people did. And sometimes it's very obvious that that's what's happening. Sometimes they're like, no, that's ridiculous. Other times it gets ingrained and it gets carried forward and forward and forward. And then it gets published in books like Evil Archaeology, where the author is insisting that these are actual historical accounts of real events that actually happened with no evidence to back them up. But if you don't know that, you're going to read that and you're going to believe it. And the next thing you know is we've got people walking around saying things like, yeah, the Native Americans used to sacrifice virgins by doing X, Y, and Z because they believed the sun god wouldn't rise without death. And your evidence for this is what? So, I hope you've enjoyed our particular topic today on our 31 Days of Archaeological Horror, the concept of evidence for human sacrifice in the archaeological record. Whenever you hear somebody making a claim about an old group of people or an ancient group of people and, oh, they practiced human sacrifice, always ask, where's your evidence? And if their evidence does not extend beyond a ancient historical recollection, then it's called bullshit. So, thanks y'all for hanging out with our video. I hope you guys enjoyed this, and if you did, give us a follow, and if you didn't, I'm sorry. And I'll see everybody in the next one.